Hello there everybody and welcome to a new video for Age of Wonders 4. In this one I'll be introducing a Necromancer build for the Mystic culture. It works really well because Mystic and Necromancy have a lot of synergies together, and I'm going to introduce the culture that I built. I'm going to talk about the tomes that I like to use, the units that you will use, and the strategy that you can and will apply with this build, victory conditions, and those things. So let's get started with the race of the culture first. The people that I built here are tough, because I personally feel like this is one of the most synergistic traits on the body slot for the Mystics, because Mystic units lack physical resilience naturally, and 2 points are a lot, and I like that. It's a no-brainer. You can of course exchange that if you feel like something else is more scratching your itch, but I personally felt like this was a solid choice. Same goes for the Arcane Focus. Magic attacks deal more damage. We are Mystics, we're spamming magic attacks, and therefore I had a hard time finding another trait that was similarly synergistic there. I was a little bit one-sided on that one because I went over the other traits, but I didn't feel like there's anything better there. With the Mystic culture's social traits, I went for powerful evokers. Here again, it powers up our combat casting, which is a vital part of the identity of the mystical culture, and the bonus ranks on battle mages and supporters, they don't hurt either, because we have a lot of battle mage and support units. Given the fact that we're playing necromancy, our necromancers are support units as well, so this is just too good not to pick it up. And gifted casters, this is even more combat casting and world casting juice with lowered costs there. I could imagine that there are options to pick up, for example, mana channelers, I felt like was another thing that you could pick up, which would reduce the summoning costs, or ancient wise ones, which reduces research costs, would also be something. But I picked up this one because I feel like, again, the Mystic culture's identity is all about spell spamming every turn, and this makes you way more potent in that regard. But as you see here, my mana stockpiles are already a little bit full, and yeah, this is a exchangeable trait in my humble opinion. So we're going quickly over the tomes that I like to use for this build. So the tier 1 tome that we're picking up is pretty clear. We're going to pick up the Tome of Souls because we're playing Necromancers. This gives you baseline access to soul collecting, skeleton units, which are really important for this build, and a couple of extra options to make your units a little bit more powerful. I highly suggest you not to use Soulfire too excessively, because your souls are better spent on units early on. So the other tier 1 tome that we're picking up is the Tome of the Horde, because the Mystic culture is really good at its tier 1 roster on its own. They got really powerful units there, and we gain really early access to undead hordes. And I personally felt like this is very synergistic and fluff-wise also fitting, because the undead hordes, everybody's fearing those, so we gain access to utilizing spamming cheap units even better. So you got Fury of the Horde to make them more powerful. Blaze of the Horde is a really good nuke as soon as you have enough low-tier undead on the board. Spawnkin is extremely potent, and Houndmaster gives you access to a physical ranged attack, which is pretty good because your baseline roster doesn't feature that. So, on the tier 2, Tome of Necromancy goes without saying. Access to zombies and necromancers and the volatile zombie hand grenade is just too good not to pick it up. And necrotic magic is even more a thing here. It powers up your mages to inflict decaying, negating all that temporal HP jazz, and it's just really good. The soul well is also very important because it is introducing a steady income of souls, making your entire economy much more potent, and Unholy Leader is later down the road extremely important for our roster as well. So, the tier 2 tome that we are also going to pick up is the Tome of Amplification, because I personally feel like this is, again, too good to not pick it up. We gain access to wonderful things like Frenzying Focus, giving our battle mages a stack of strengthened whenever they attack, or for supporters as well. We gain Amplify Minds, a nice steroid for our knowledge production. Astral Blood, which gives us crit hit improvements whenever we cast spells, so that's for the entire race of yours. And the Amplification Pylon chain lightning, these are also quite nice. Amplified arrows is something you can mostly skip on over because you're not that heavy on the ranged unit part. But if you spend a lot of Houndmasters, this might make sense as well. Resonance Fields is just another nice thing. Spams out a conduit, and conduits are always nice to have, and spell amplification is a nice trait for your heroes because we're flinging a lot of spells. In the tier 3 roster, well, Great Transformation is what we're aiming for, of course, of course. We want Whiteborn to make our entire race finally undead, so we gain access to all the bonuses. Our Necromancy bonuses are now applying to our entire species. That's amazing. Fetid Legion is debuffing the enemy and making all units a little bit more brawny, and the other parts of this book are also quite interesting. Especially Domain of Death comes in very, very handy because city stability is something you will be a little bit struggling with, especially when you're aiming for a tall playstyle. So Necrotic Spires rounds this up with a wonderful defensive option, and there's also, of course, the option to go for Weakening Aura on your hero as well, but that's not too important here. So we go on over to the next tier 3 tome that we're going to pick up. On the next one, we got a little bit of an option. I personally vote for Pandemonium. As soon as I find it, that is. Here. The Tome of Pandemonium gives you access to more debuffs, and I personally feel like that's a very, very synergistic thing with the Necromancers. Havoc Magic for more negative status, Mass Hysteria for even more negative status. You can use the Chaos Eater as some frontliner, but I think he's not that massively good. But the thing here is the whole negative status synergy is really good because you already spam some negative statuses as you're a Necromancer, so that's pretty nice. The other option that I felt like was quite worth noting out, if you weren't going for the Amplification Tome, for example, and went for Doom Herald instead, Subjugation makes a nice fit here as well, because you are really good at demoralizing enemies when you picked up Doom Herald instead of Amplification, but I personally feel like that's only a side option. I think Pandemonium is way more synergistic. And with tier 4, well, we are going to go for the Shadow Books of Oblivion and the Reaper. So Reaper adds in instant kill mechanics. We can reanimate all units. We can mark enemies for death. We gain access to another really, really powerful innately undead unit, and most importantly, our soul economy will be boosted a lot by that. The Oblivion Tome is, for me, more like a filler. I feel like you could also pick up other stuff here as well. If you have enough Astral Affinity together, you can also really well opt into the Tome of the Astral Mirror, which will make you a lot more versatile because you can copy the enemy's tricks and you can multiply your own tricks. Your leader is more available with the Throne of Mirrors. All these things are really, really good, but there is nothing bad about the Oblivion Tome either, because it provides much needed hard crowd control in form of insanity, and the summon here is really powerful. You have a lot of mana, so you can use that as well. And the Tomb of the Eternal Lord, well, I don't think I need to say much about that. There's a lot of necromancy in it already, and once we are there, we are actually only waiting to bunker up and win the game via either magical victory or just conquering the rest of the world with those constantly respawning undead that we have at our disposal. So that is the tome strategy for our build. So unit-wise, you will use in the very, very early stages of the game a lot of Arcanists, and I want to suggest to you that you are going to use skeletons instead of your arcane guards. This has two reasons. This makes your wallet a lot easier on the pressure, because this way you can use gold for the arcanists and mana for the skeletons. And on the other hand, later down the road, once you have access to the Scroll of Attunement spell, your skeletons will be just as good as your regular units, and since they are already undead from the get-go, that's most of the time better for you. You have also access to the Bone Golem in case you need a shock unit. That's really cool because, you know, if you don't skill your hero to be a shock unit, a cheap, early on accessible shock unit is always a nice thing to have to get a little bit of control over the enemy. Your roster later down the road, the tier 2 part here, the spell shields aren't that interesting for you, the soothers are way more, and of course we are going to aim for spell breakers and necromancers as soon as we can. Your typical strategy is to spam the battlefield with cheap and inexpensive tier 1 skeletons and arcanists early on, and later down the road we exchange the cheap arcanists with spell breakers. They're just better in every point. But on the way there, our tier 1 units, due to the Chaos Tome and all the stuff that we got, will be a lot more powerful. And, well, in this game, for example, I'm beating down a barbarian player in the early game with that strategy, because you just have access to so many expendable units, and the necromancy's biggest sales point is that you have access to spells that allow you to constantly summon new units. You are much relying on expendable units, and I personally strongly recommend you to make good use of stuff like raise zombies and the necromancer's special skill to raise undead. Generally, those guys here, they are the backbone of your army. You should really try to get a lot of these guys going as quick as possible, because they are just really, really important at providing you with new troops. Because the major trick that you're pulling off with the mystic culture, with necromancy, is that you keep the front line alive with dirty, cheap, inexpensive units that you can often just pull out of your hat during combat, and in the back line you have those high quality spellcasters that will pelt away with a lot of damage on your enemy. The wonderful part here is that the tier 1 battle mages of the mystic culture serve as wonderful cannon fodder if you manage to kill off your spellbreakers accidentally, or if you just want to have a big fat army at your disposal. The tomes that you picked up are really, really good for that. Also, your hero will have access to some really nice skills there. I went for Battle Seeker training, which gives even more tier 1 power there, and there's also the Unholy Leader, which is really, really worth picking up, and after that, Strength training was also really cool. So in general, you're a swarming strategy when you're playing Mystic Necromancer. Early on and later down the road, you can increase the quality of your troops with the ever-increasing amount of spellbooks that you gather. And in the mid and late game, your army will be mostly Necromancers, high-quality undead, like Reapers, for example, and a lot of impromptu summonable units that will utilize either your own losses or the enemy's losses. Therefore, even in the late stages of the game, always bring a nice roster of disposable tier 1 units so your necromancers can have something to work with, just for the case that you're not able to wrestle down enough enemy units right at the beginning of a fight. You need those summons. You need them at all the time. This is really, really important for your strategy. So, last point, victory-wise, military victory is amazingly easy to achieve because you can spam out dirty, rotten many troops. I'm not really doing much here, but I could have done much more. So you have, with souls and mana, a really, really inexpensive amount of troops available. You have access to wonderful perks here to make your troops even more cheap. So the splice into chaos makes it even possible to make the unit upkeep for your tier 1 roster even lower. There's a couple of similar traits for magic origin units in the astral tree. And last but not least, I also want to mention that you're pretty awesome at diplomacy as well, due to your access to shadow magic. A shadow is pretty good at diplomacy too. So the other victory option is obviously, of course, the magic victory, because you're really good at bunkering up and making the enemy making it a pain for the enemy to slouch through your domain. For one side, you can infest everything with undead. The other part is that your later stage necromancy tomes are really good at providing a lot of tall playstyle. Especially the Great Transformation book is where your troops grow super, super resilient from, especially on their own terrain, because those necrotic spires are amazingly powerful, because they heal your undead, and after Whiteborn, everybody's undead, and you gain access to lifesteal. So yeah, that's one interpretation of the necromancy path. I hope you like it. I do aim to introduce other necromancy paths and other builds, of course, so feel free to let me know in the comment section what kind of builds you'd like to see from me done. And feel free to leave a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I'd be delighted if you'd check out the playlist down there leading to all the other info videos that I made for Age of Wonders 4. And last but not least, again, I want to put out a thanks to all the supporters of the channel. And if you want to find out more, check out Patreon, PayPal, and Buy Me a Coffee as ways and means to get into the crowd. And if not, let me thank you for watching this video, and I hope you're going to have some good old fun with necromancy.